My husband, there's no surprise that my work got better when I met you, because I never knew what it felt like for someone to have my back. To that trailblazer who allowed me to have that.
Sandra Bullock eventually opened up about the moment she realized her marriage to Jesse James couldn't be saved. What makes this story so heartbreaking isn't just the betrayal itself, it's the timing of it all. For just 10 days, Sandra was able to celebrate one of the biggest achievements of her career after winning an Academy Award. Then, almost overnight, her personal life exploded across headlines everywhere. But there was one detail the public didn't know at the time. Inside her home was a newborn baby boy, a child whose existence had been kept completely private. And the man Sandra publicly thanked during her Oscar acceptance speech, the man she said had shown her what true support felt like, knew that baby was there. He knew exactly what was happening inside their home. Yet the choices he made would soon change everything. For years, Sandra stayed remarkably quiet. Rumors spread, stories were written, quotes were invented and repeated. She rarely responded. But over time, speaking in her own words and on her own terms, she revealed what ultimately made the divorce unavoidable. According to Sandra, it wasn't simply about infidelity. Many relationships have survived that kind of crisis. What made this situation different was when it happened, and what was at stake when it happened. That's one reason so many people still admire Sandra Bullock today. Long before the scandal, she had spent years searching for something simple, a real family. By 2003, she was 39 years old and one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. Audiences loved her from films like Speed and Miss Congeniality, but despite all the success, she often returned home alone. She wanted lasting love and a family of her own, but she refused to rush into the wrong relationship just to make that happen. Sadly, she would later discover that the man she trusted most wasn't who she believed he was. In December 2003, Sandra visited a motorcycle shop in Long Beach, California called West Coast Choppers. The visit was arranged as a surprise for a child in her family who admired the shop's famous owner, Jesse James. He seemed completely different from the polished Hollywood crowd. He projected an image of being straightforward, rugged, and authentic. Sandra later admitted that this was exactly what attracted her. He appeared honest and genuine. That impression would become painfully important years later. On July 16, 2005, Sandra and Jesse married during a private ceremony at a ranch. After waiting decades to find the right partner, Sandra believed she had finally found her future. But she wasn't just marrying Jesse. She was stepping into a complicated family situation that included 3 children from his previous relationships. When one of Jesse's former partners faced legal troubles, Sandra became deeply involved in helping care for his young daughter. She attended school activities, participated in family responsibilities, and worked through difficult custody matters. While balancing a demanding Hollywood career, she committed herself to helping create stability for the children in their lives. She gave her marriage everything she had. What she didn't know was that devastating revelations were waiting just around the corner. By late 2009, Sandra and Jesse had quietly begun one of the most meaningful chapters of their lives. They were adopting a baby boy from New Orleans. In January 2010, their son Louis was born, and they chose to keep the adoption completely private. The decision wasn't about publicity, it was about protecting those precious early months and giving their child a peaceful start to life. Then came January 17, 2010. Sandra won Best Actress at the Golden Globe Awards for The Blind Side. Standing before millions of viewers, she praised Jesse publicly and credited him for supporting her. She spoke about finally understanding what it felt like to have someone truly stand beside her. Jesse sat in the audience smiling as the cameras focused on him. Looking back, that moment feels almost impossible to watch. Just weeks later, reports emerged that would shock fans around the world. While Sandra was celebrating professional success and embracing motherhood, allegations surfaced suggesting that Jesse had been involved in inappropriate relationships during their marriage. According to reports that followed, some of the alleged behavior overlapped with major milestones in Sandra's life, including the adoption process. Then came March 7, 2010, the Academy Awards. Sandra won the Oscar for The Blind Side. Cameras captured emotional reactions from Jesse as he watched her accept the industry's highest honor. To the public, they looked like a happy couple celebrating a dream come true.
Stood on stage and told the world I never knew what it was like for somebody to have my back until you. I love you. She stood on stage in front of millions of people and said that. She loved you. Why would you hurt her?
I never, in a million years, the last person I would ever want to hurt or harm is her or the kids. I've spent my whole life with the kids and with her trying to protect her, you know, and protect her from everything. But the most hurt she's ever been caused is by the person that wanted to protect her. So it's terrible, and she's going to be hurt for a long time. You know, I don't know, it's hard for me to talk about a little bit because, you know, I still really love her and care about her.
What nobody realized was how quickly everything was about to fall apart. Only 10 days later, on March 17, 2010, a tabloid published claims from Michelle McGee, who alleged that she had been involved in a relationship with Jesse during his marriage to Sandra. The story immediately dominated entertainment news and sparked intense public discussion. More reports followed, creating an avalanche of headlines that seemed impossible to stop.
And that's the thing. That's the million-dollar question. You had the perfect life. You had the perfect wife. Why did you throw it away?
I don't know, you know, during the midst of all of it, and when I was doing it, one, I knew it was horrible. It made me feel horrible. And two, I knew I would get caught eventually, and I think I wanted to get caught.
At the time, Sandra was scheduled to attend promotional events overseas for The Blind Side. Instead, she canceled her appearances and quietly stepped away from the spotlight. Publicly, very little was said. There were no dramatic press conferences, no lengthy interviews, no public confrontations. Sandra simply disappeared from view. Many assumed she was hiding from embarrassment. Others believed she was overwhelmed by the media attention. But those closest to the situation knew she was focused on something much more important: protecting her family and caring for her newborn son during one of the most difficult periods of her life. As additional allegations surfaced and more stories emerged, the situation became even more painful. Reports suggested that the problems may have extended far beyond a single incident. For Sandra, the picture that was forming appeared very different from the marriage she thought she had built. Then, on March 18th, Jesse James released a public statement as the controversy continued to grow, setting the stage for the next chapter in one of Hollywood's most talked-about breakups. His exact words were clear and direct. "There is only one person to blame for this whole situation, and that is me. It's because of my poor judgment that I deserve everything bad that is coming my way." There were no denials, no complicated explanations, and no attempt to shift responsibility. He publicly accepted the blame. But remember the quality that first attracted Sandra to him? Honesty. The trait she trusted most turned out to be the very thing that had been missing all along. That's what made the situation hit even harder. Soon afterward, Jesse checked into a treatment facility in Arizona, and media attention exploded. Reporters, photographers, and television crews all wanted answers. One question dominated every headline: where was Sandra Bullock? Many people assumed she was devastated behind closed doors. Others imagined she was hiding from the embarrassment. But what Sandra was actually doing during those weeks was something completely different. While the world focused on scandal, she focused on protecting the most important person in her life. For 6 weeks, she stayed almost entirely out of sight. One of the most recognizable women on the planet seemed to vanish. Yet she wasn't running from the headlines. She was caring for a newborn baby and shielding him from the chaos surrounding her life. That part of the story remained hidden until April 28, 2010, when People magazine released a cover that stunned the public. There, in Sandra's arms, was a baby boy the world had never seen before. His name was Louis. In a single moment, Sandra revealed 2 life-changing developments. She introduced her son to the world, and she confirmed that she had filed for divorce. Suddenly, everything made sense. Those quiet weeks weren't about avoiding attention. They were about protecting a child during one of the most difficult chapters of her life. Think about what she was carrying during that time. Her marriage was being discussed everywhere. Cameras followed her every move. Reporters analyzed every rumor. At the same time, she was adjusting to life with a newborn baby, dealing with sleepless nights, emotional pain, and endless public scrutiny. Yet she never turned her struggle into a public spectacle. She kept moving forward with remarkable determination. Then she made a decision that spoke louder than any interview ever could. Sandra completed Louie's adoption as a single mother. She chose to continue building that future despite everything that had happened. Her focus remained exactly where she believed it belonged, on her child and the life she wanted to create for him. The divorce became official on June 28, 2010. It happened quietly and without public drama. There were no explosive interviews, no public feuds, and no attempts to create a media circus. Sandra handled the process with dignity and moved forward. Before the divorce was finalized, Jesse appeared on national television and made a statement that followed him for years. He admitted, "I took a pretty amazing life and marriage and threw it away." He even described himself as the most hated man in the world. Those weren't Sandra's words. They were his own reflections on what had happened. Still, two major questions remained. The first was how deeply losing that family affected Jesse. Years later, he would speak about it openly. The second question was even bigger. What exactly had Sandra learned from the experience that convinced her there was nothing left to repair? Why did she seem so certain that the marriage could never be rebuilt? The answer didn't come quickly. For years, Sandra revealed very little. Whenever false stories appeared claiming she had made emotional statements to the press, her representatives often pushed back strongly. She wasn't interested in letting tabloids define her experience. She wanted control over her own story, and she refused to hand that control to anyone else. Eventually, pieces of the truth emerged. The first piece came in 2013 during an interview with Vogue. Sandra said, "We're all where we're supposed to be. I am exactly where I want to be now. You can't go backward. I'm not going backward." There was no anger in those words, no bitterness, just acceptance and a clear decision to leave the past behind. The second piece arrived in 2018. Reflecting on everything that happened, she explained, "My life took a trajectory that wasn't very pleasant, but I feel like it had to happen in order for me to fully understand what family was about." That statement revealed something powerful. The crisis didn't destroy her understanding of family. In many ways, it strengthened it and helped her define what truly mattered. Then came the final piece of the puzzle. Sandra eventually spoke about the challenge of navigating heartbreak while caring for a newborn. She openly asked, "How do you process grief and not hurt your child in the process?" That question captured everything she was facing at the time. Her answer became the guiding principle that shaped her decisions moving forward. She explained, "My obligation was to him and not tainting the first year of his life with my grief." That statement says more than any headline ever could. For Sandra, the priority was never protecting her image. It was protecting her son. Once she believed the situation threatened the peaceful environment she wanted for him, her path became clear. Her attention shifted entirely toward creating stability, security, and a positive future for her child. Years later, Jesse also reflected on the consequences of what happened. He admitted, "I got divorced and lost a kid I adopted because of it." He described losing that family connection as one of the most painful outcomes of the entire situation. It was a consequence he would continue discussing long after the headlines faded. As the years passed, Sandra focused on motherhood, family, and building a new chapter of her life. Jesse's life moved in different directions, but public conversations about the scandal never fully disappeared. Even years later, he continued addressing questions about 2010. At one point he said, "Yeah, I did cheat on my wife. I stood up and took accountability for it, and that's the end of the story." But for much of the public, it never became the end of the story. The controversy remained one of the defining moments of his public image, while Sandra's response became a lasting example of resilience, strength, and putting family first, no matter how difficult the circumstances became. Today, all the success, the television appearances, the businesses, and the fame are often overshadowed by one reality that continues to follow Jesse James everywhere. For many people, his story is remembered through a single painful chapter: the marriage he lost with Sandra Bullock. One decision changed the way the public viewed him forever. Meanwhile, Sandra stayed focused on the promise she made during the hardest period of her life. She raised Louis with love, stability, and protection, keeping him far away from the chaos that once surrounded their family. In 2015, she expanded that family by adopting her daughter, Layla, creating the life she had always dreamed of on her own terms and in her own quiet way. Her career continued to thrive as well. She earned another Academy Award nomination, remained one of Hollywood's most respected stars, and eventually found a partner who embraced both her and her children. Through every success and every challenge, family remained at the center of her world. Then life brought another heartbreaking loss, and once again Sandra made a choice that revealed exactly who she was. She stepped back from Hollywood and focused on what mattered most to her, being present for her children. The promise she made years earlier never changed. Mother first. Always. Think back to that Oscar night at the beginning of this story. The world saw Sandra standing on top of Hollywood, celebrating what looked like the greatest moment of her life. But the real blessing wasn't sitting in the audience or waiting backstage. It was already at home. A tiny baby boy, only a few months old, sleeping peacefully through a storm he never even knew existed. And the reason he never felt that storm was simple. His mother made sure of it every single day. In the end, Jesse may have summed up the entire situation better than anyone when he admitted, "I took a pretty amazing life and threw it away." Looking back at everything that happened, it's easy to see why this story continues to resonate with so many people years later. On the surface, it might seem like another Hollywood breakup, another celebrity scandal that dominated headlines before fading away. But this story was always about something much bigger than that. It wasn't really about red carpets, award shows, or tabloid covers. It was about a woman facing one of the most painful moments of her life while carrying the responsibility of protecting a child who depended entirely on her. While millions of people debated the scandal, Sandra Bullock was focused on something far more important. She wasn't thinking about public opinion. She wasn't trying to win headlines. She was thinking about her son and the future she wanted to build for him. That's what made her response so different from many celebrity breakups. There were no explosive interviews. There was no public campaign against her ex-husband. There were no weekly television appearances telling her side of the story. Instead, she quietly made her decisions and kept moving forward. In a world where every personal struggle is often turned into public entertainment, that kind of restraint stood out. What many people admire most isn't that Sandra survived the scandal. It's how she survived it. She chose not to let one painful chapter define the rest of her life. She refused to let betrayal become the center of her identity. Instead, she shifted her energy toward creating the family she had always wanted. That decision changed everything. Over time, the headlines faded. The rumors stopped. The endless television debates moved on to the next celebrity controversy. But the choices Sandra made during those difficult months continued shaping her future. She embraced motherhood completely and built a life centered around love, stability, and family. The dreams she once feared might disappear ended up becoming reality after all. And that's the part of this story that often gets overlooked. Sometimes people focus so much on what was lost that they miss what was gained. Yes, Sandra experienced heartbreak. Yes, she endured public embarrassment during one of the most vulnerable periods of her life. But she also discovered a strength she may never have known she possessed. She found clarity about what truly mattered, and she created a future that reflected those priorities. Years later, when Sandra spoke about family, there was a sense of peace in her words. Not because the past never happened, but because she had learned how to move beyond it. She understood that life doesn't always unfold the way we expect. Sometimes the path takes a sharp turn. Sometimes the plans we carefully build fall apart. But that doesn't mean the story is over. Sometimes it's only the beginning of a completely different chapter. For Jesse James, the consequences of those choices became a permanent part of his public story. No matter how much time passed, people continued connecting his name to the collapse of a marriage that many once believed was built to last. His own public statements reflected an understanding of what had been lost. The opportunities, the trust, and the future he once had all became part of a lesson learned the hard way. But for Sandra Bullock, the ending turned into something much more powerful than revenge or public vindication. It became a story about resilience, a story about protecting the people you love when everything around you feels uncertain. A story about refusing to allow disappointment to define your future. In the end, the greatest achievement wasn't the Oscar sitting on a shelf. It wasn't the box office success, the awards, or the worldwide fame. Those things mattered, but they weren't what gave her life meaning. The greatest achievement was building the family she had dreamed about for years and creating a home filled with love, security, and hope. And maybe that's why this story still matters today. Because long after the headlines disappeared, one lesson remained crystal clear. Fame can fade. Scandals come and go. Public opinion changes overnight. But the choices we make for the people we love leave a lasting impact that can never be measured by awards, money, or attention. Sandra Bullock's story wasn't defined by the moment everything fell apart. It was defined by what she chose to do afterward, and that's the reason so many people continue to respect her journey all these years later. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you in the next story.